The next panel is the innovation race, IP and U.S. global leadership, China and beyond. China is the great obstacle now. They were, they were known as a copying nation, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, probably 20 years ago. And they still are to some extent, but they're also a very innovative nation. And they understand our patent system very well and our IP system. They're doing some of the things that we're doing. They're doing it better in some ways. In any case, this panel will look at the competition with China, the race, and what role intellectual property rights play, and look at the role that IP plays in making us as a nation, US, more competitive. Adam?
So thank you, Bruce, and delighted to be moderating this panel. Our panelists can come up to the stage, please, and I'll just give us some quick framing remarks and introduce them. Unfortunately, I do not have the awesome quiz that Elizabeth came prepared with her opening remarks. I have not seen, that was a really good quiz. The one that I usually see on the internet is the choice between, they give you a name and they say, is this a drug name or an elf in Lord of the Rings? So you certainly beat me on that. But for those who do know me and know my presence on the internet, know that I do an on this date in innovation history tweet on my Twitter account, and to balance out Kara's excellent discussion of Edison, yesterday was actually the anniversary of Tesla's patent issuing on his alternating current invention in 1888, of which many know, of course. Then Westinghouse transferred it to George Westinghouse, became deployed in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and from there became the dominant system for producing and distributing electricity nationwide. So I know Tesla fans would be very happy to hear that, given that Edison got his due here today. I myself don't take a particular position on that dispute. I think they're both amazing innovators. For those who know me as well, I have two beagles and their names are both Tesla and Edison. I'm really delighted to be moderating this fantastic panel of thought leaders and representatives from the innovation industries and policy advocates. The issue of the health of the U.S. innovation economy more broadly, and the ability to rely on what have historically been kind of effective and reliable patent rights, the legal platform that has been the launching pad for our innovation economy for 200 years is very much in question. That by itself would be a serious concern, but we now face very serious geopolitical threats and economic competition from countries like China, and this makes it even more concerning. There is actually a very important documentary that was released last year called Innovation Race that you can stream online, and I highly recommend checking it out. It goes into great depth as to what are the concerns and why this is a pressing matter for the United States. I'm not a firm believer in recounting everyone's lengthy achievements and many accolades. We have an awesome invention of a vast interconnected network of computers and databases that you can access now remotely, and you can find out all you want by just Googling their information. So I will just give name, rank, and serial number. So going in order, and from closest to me, we first have Andrei Iancu, former director of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, co-founder of the Council for Innovation Promotion, and a partner at IREL in Manila. And then next we have Patrick Kilbride, Senior Vice President at the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And last but certainly not least, we have Kendalle Burlin O'Connell, who is CEO of the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council. And as I mentioned, if you want to know more about them, certainly Google them and find out all of their impressive achievements and the great things about their organizations. We're going to engage in a little bit of back and forth. I'll just posit an initial question to each of them, and I'll join them in the chairs, and then we'll have some back and forth, and then we'll hopefully bring in the audience a few minutes later. So without much further ado, I'll ask my first question to Andrei, which is, what do you think is kind of the most pressing policy concern in your mind? Of many there might be, but perhaps the most pressing or top several pressing policy concerns facing the United States today with respect to its innovation economy?
Thanks, Adam, and so good to see everybody. Good to be back in Boston with all of you and so many familiar faces. Great to be with you guys as well. Always an honor to be with you, Patrick. We've done quite a few panels together, especially past couple of years, vis-a-vis the TRIPS waiver and other such things. So to the top-level question, you know, what are some of the top pressing issues in the innovation economy in the United States? Well, at the highest level, I really think the United States and actually the world is at an inflection point. We've faced this type of an inflection point several times in the past in our history. You know, one of the more famous ones is the space race in the late 50s and then into the 60s, when the Soviet Union surprised us by putting the first satellite in space, the Sputnik, and then the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. And that gave rise here in the United States to what we've come to know as the Sputnik moment. And President Kennedy issued a call to the nation to rally around space technology so that, in his words, the United States would land a man on the moon before the decade, the 1960s, is over. It was a call to action, and it was broad-based, government, academia, industry working together under the leadership and vision that was outlined by the president to actually achieve that goal, and it did happen. We are now at a new inflection point. It's much more serious because our leadership is our technological leadership, and frankly, as a result, the way of life is being challenged in multiple ways, in multiple areas of technology, not just space. So we are being challenged right now in all the technologies of the next industrial or the fourth industrial revolution, as some folks count. So, for example, in telecom, 5G, 6G technology, depending how you count, we have already fallen far behind. For example, last year, more than 50% of 5 and 6G installations around the world, more than half, were done by two companies, Huawei and ZTE, and this is despite US and Western sanctions. Despite the fact that they're shut out of most of the Western market, they account for more than half of worldwide installations. US companies, about 9%. That's 5G and 6G. Artificial intelligence, I believe we are in a neck-and-neck race. Nevertheless, China is receiving more than 6 times as many patents on deep learning than US-based companies. Quantum computing, again, neck-and-neck race, and it's long-term technology. And I think the United States is doing a fairly good job competing at this early stage. Nevertheless, about a year and a half ago, the Chinese were the first to demonstrate a quantum uplink to a satellite and back to Earth. We haven't done that, and we're basically still, trying to achieve that terrestrially. And I can keep going on and on. One of the bright areas is biotech, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Kendalle on that. And the United States continues to be significantly ahead of that, and we see that with the mRNA vaccines and the like. And here, in this one area where we are ahead, the administration decided that it is okay to waive intellectual property rights, patents in particular, with respect to COVID-19 vaccines, and provide potentially a free-for-all to our competitors, including China, who is desperately seeking access to the mRNA platform. So the question is, what is the United States going to do about all this? What are we going to do to make sure that we compete and that we don't lose the race? Because if we do lose the race, it will be a very long time before we can catch up, as we have seen from past experience over the past couple of hundred years. Folks in the innovations ecosphere like us on this panel, you in the audience, we see this happening. We've been seeing this coming for several years now. It's happening, okay? And we're ringing the bell. And the problem is that our leaders, our policymakers are not seeing it, are not understanding it, and or at the minimum, if they are, they're not doing anything about it in a concerted, organized fashion. In fact, many of the policy positions some of our leaders are taking are going in the exact opposite direction, working to hamper the U.S. innovation economy as opposed to help it. So, this is an immediate call to action that somebody has to issue to the nation, like President Kennedy did in the 1960s. We need to do this now and urgently. You know, I've been saying that we need a Secretary of Innovation in the United States. I don't mean that we need a new cabinet position, but somebody, whether it's the Secretary of Commerce or whoever, needs to be empowered with the innovation platform and develop for the United States an innovation policy so that we can rally around it as a nation and start activating in all these various areas of technology. From an IP perspective, I believe that on the patent front, an IP is just a tool for, and there's other tools that are necessary, but IP is a necessary tool that needs to be perfected in order for the innovation economy in the United States, in a free market economy, to operate at its highest levels. So on IP, to answer finally Adam's question from 20 minutes ago, number one issue, we need to restore the right to injunctions when there is a finding of infringement. Number two, we have to make sure that patents are entitled to, at some point, achieve quiet title and not be subject to repeated attacks at the PTO, in the courts, and other venues. So to me, those are the two major issues vis-a-vis patents. And number three, we have to fix Section 101 in the court system. I believe we have addressed it at the PTO, but in the courts, it needs to be fixed so that we know at the entrance point, the threshold answer to whether what I have invented is subject to the patent system. To me, fixing those three things on the patent side will immediately rejuvenate the innovation economy in the United States from the patent front aspect. There's, as I said, lots of other issues that have to be addressed, like research and development investment, immigration issues surrounding technology. You know, we have to deal with these waivers on the international front. But from a patent perspective, to me, those are the three top issues, Adam.
Great. Well, that question clearly prompted a tour de force, so I will stick with it for Patrick and Kendall as well. So, Patrick, what do you think are the three, top issue or top several issues kind of facing the United States today as a global tech leader and its, and with its support for its U.S. innovation economy more broadly?
Well, thanks, Adam. And I think Bruce honors me too much putting me in this really distinguished group, but it is a privilege, and I appreciate it. I think the biggest problem we have now is we're forgetting how we got here. We're forgetting how we became the world's leading economy, the technological leader, the home of the American dream. And we have to go back to doing the things that we historically did right and make sure that we apply those to a knowledge economy in the same way that we did to a physical, tangible economy. So, what are the things that we did better than any other country in the world? Number one, we encourage risk-taking and enable failure through our laws, through our rights. Two, we respect private property rights and we surround them with a rule of law environment. And number three, we make markets that allocate resources to the most productive activities and enable exchange among all the different actors who together make up an ecosystem and an economy. And I think in our intellectual property debate, we've become confused about how these principles work. And part of it is because our system and other commenters, there were a number of great questions here already this morning, about reducing the complexity of the system, upgrading it to match today's economy. When you think 40 years ago, 85% of corporate value was in physical plant and equipment, tangible assets, and 15%, as measured by Ocean Tomo at least, in intangible assets. And today that's reversed, 90% intangible, 10% tangible. But we've done a really poor job of capturing what that value looks like, identifying the assets, figuring out ways to accurately value them, protect them. So we're stuck with these narrow buckets of patents for invention, of copyright for creativity, of trademarks for brands and logos. And to Dan's point earlier, we've forgotten about the real IP, which is the intellectual value add that people throughout our economy are creating every day. All those people on TikTok and Instagram and all the apps that my daughter hopes I don't know about, people understand. They inherently understand that is their IP, that they're creating a brand for themselves. And we can figure this out. A lot of smart people here. I always come to mind of Hernando de Soto, the Peruvian economist who wrote The Mystery of Capital. And he basically wrote about, in Peru and other countries that he observed, developing countries, that the reason capitalism and democracy weren't working for them the way they worked for the United States was because they lacked a rule of law environment. So much of the economy was informal, and the assets that people were creating, they weren't able to leverage. They could use them as a tool. You own a truck, okay? You own a food truck, say, and you're able to generate an income, but because you can't, it's informal, you don't have an ownership right, you can't go to the bank and get a loan, you can't leverage that capital, you can't turn it into a bigger business. That's where we find ourselves today with intellectual property. As Andrei said, too much uncertainty in the system, too much difficulty to allow inventors, creators, brand owners at every level to leverage their intellectual value added and turn it into something more. So I think we need to revision the system to be much broader, to bring many more people and many more types of intellectual value added assets into the system, make them identifiable, protectable, and leverageable. So thanks, Adam.
Kendalle.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm certainly punching way above my weight class on this panel with these colleagues, so bear with me. Don't let the Esquire at the end of my name fool you. And so I have a little bit of a same but different perspective on this. And and my lens is going to be very Massachusetts, life science centric also. But let's just do a little landscape exercise about our innovation economy here in Massachusetts, right? We're the best place in the world for life sciences. We have over 1,000 biotech companies here. We have 18 of the top 20 biopharma companies that have a physical presence here. Our universities, we have over 130 academic institutions here. And in the last 10 years, they've spun out over 500 companies, right? So we are a force as it relates to innovation, but for some reason, we aren't happy with that. We're trying to sort of stifle that innovation. And so from my perspective, the most concerning piece of policy that's impacting our innovation ecosystem, and not just here in Massachusetts, nationally, is the Inflation Reduction Act. Certainly the most impactful legislative change to our industry in decades. And really, we don't even understand the full impact of what this will mean on our companies, on innovations, and ultimately patients. But I have some good stats. So we had our annual meeting last week, and there's a company, Vital Transformation, that has probably done the most research on this area. So when you think about, I guess anecdotally, the impacts of what the Inflation Reduction Act will mean and how CMS will start to put price controls, price negotiation in place for Medicare and the trickle effect of that, I wanted to give you some numbers, so bear with me because I'm going to read this because, again, hot off the press from last week. But through their analysis, they said that there's 220 drugs that could theoretically be put through the pipeline and walk through these pricing provisions. So there's 41 firms that would be impacted in 92 therapies. And what they found was there would be about a 40% loss of net revenue. Think about that for a minute, right? So with 92 different therapies, there's a 40% loss of net revenue. Well, if companies are innovating, and we know it takes about $2.6 billion to get a drug through FDA approval, and also about 12% of drugs that make it to phase 1 clinical trials actually make it through FDA approval, right? This is costly, it takes a long time, and most drugs, companies fail. So there has to be the promise of return on investment for companies to innovate. And so basically through his analysis, it takes about $190 billion and brings it down to about $113 billion by the end of what would be this, by 2030. And so that's, based on the 9 and 13-year exclusivity period and negotiations. And so the other thing that's interesting is about 25% of all sales goes back into R&D. And for biotechs, that's about 40% that goes back in, right? If we're taking that out, there's just not going to be new innovation. And what's going to be impacted in this, right? Well, clearly small molecule research is going to be heavily impacted. And by the way, that's a huge piece of our market here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts will have outsized impact. He estimated that about between 5,000 and 10,000 jobs will be lost during that period of time. And about 30% of small molecule research would stop here in Massachusetts. So areas that this will heavily impact, obviously rare disease, orphan disease. I mean, essentially there'll be no new research in the orphan disease space. And neurology, huge area. Right now, almost all of what is funded through NIH is small molecule. So I think the impacts are going to be very far-reaching. And we know, we've seen, proven, what price controls do in Europe, right? So in the 80s, about 60% of pharmaceutical innovation happened in Europe. Now it's less than a third. And actually in 2021, China sort of tied the US for venture-backed biotechs. So they had 92 venture-backed biotechs in China in 2021, the same as the US. And Europe remained stagnant, so they had 40. So we know what price controls can do to an economy. And if you can't get that return on investment, companies will still innovate. They just won't do it here in the United States. They will go to other places, China likely, where they can ensure to their investors that there will be return on investment. So from my perspective, certainly for life sciences, this is the most concerning piece of legislation that I've seen since I've been at MassBio in 15 years.
Can I? Yeah, please. Well, at least the IRA reduced inflation, so that's
right, yes.
That's the good news. For this audience, what most people don't realize is that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is probably the most important piece of patent legislation in our lifetimes. It doesn't mention the word patent, really,
No.
but it precisely regulates patented property rights. So it's effectively as if it's the Congress passes a law that controls the price of your land. And certainly some local governments do that, but it goes because patents are a property right, and one of the fundamental rights of a property right owner, of a property owner, is the ability to set prices and dispose of its rights as it sees fit in a free market economy. Controls on that is a control on that property right. And that's what this piece of legislation does. Most of the patent community is not attending to it because it doesn't say the word patent. And it's quite a huge concern, because if they've done it there, they can do it in almost every other industry. They can do it in what they determine to be climate change industry, for example, and energy controls, and it can keep going on and on.
And it can be sort of mirrored in states individually, so compounded, right? And I think the interesting piece of this is that it was meant to, in theory, help patients, right? And there's aspects of it that it does. But the health equity impacts of this are so far-reaching. This was absolutely done in a bit in a vacuum with major, major unintended consequences. But think of the health equity impacts of this, right? When there's entire disease areas, particularly the rare and orphan disease community, that are already very much sort of isolated and not included in much of our research and funding, that will completely be aborted. They will stop research in those areas because it just doesn't make financial sense, right? I mean, and that was certainly a major unintended consequence. And that's a narrative that our partners in government have to understand. And I think there's a major awareness gap there. And that's something that, you know, me, MassBio, are working really hard from a data-driven perspective to make sure that our delegation here, at least in Massachusetts and more broadly, understands what this, and there's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can do is try to mitigate the impacts, but it's there, it's law. There's nothing we can do about it except try to make sure, it's like a dial, right? So CMS could turn it up. We need them to work to turn it down a little bit.
Yeah, you know, the irony is that this is a biopharmaceutical innovation ecosystem that's working really well, and I think probably represented well in this room in terms of, you think about the role of government funding in early stage scientific research, the universities that are carrying on, you know, all of that research and that are able to own the rights to the intellectual property that results and then license it to, you know, to biotech startups or bigger companies. And, you know, you see that virtuous cycle where there's money coming back into the system, you know, and that's worked especially well in this biopharmaceutical innovation ecosystem, you know, to sort of take that metaphor a little further. You know, I think there's biodiversity in this ecosystem, especially when compared to other industries in the United States today that have become much more vertically integrated because of the difficulties owning and maintaining patents. So you see, you know, the small players, as somebody pointed out, maybe it was Tiffany, the small players have no choice but to sell out to the big companies because they know they can't defend what they have.
This has been a fantastic discussion, or at least a fantastic discussion in terms of data and identifying the concerns. And picking up on this kind of emphasis on this incredible biotech innovation ecosystem that has developed in the United States. You know, Kendall, you mentioned, you know, how we flipped in terms of the number of innovations coming out of Europe, and you know, and that coincides with the statistics I've seen that, you know, almost 2/3 of all new drugs today are invented by companies based in the United States. And this is an area where we see a lot of rhetoric as well, as some of the people talked about already earlier today, that sometimes harmful rhetoric on the other side. So during the debate over the WTO waiver that Andrei referenced, there were billboards and posters that popped up around Washington, D.C. and around cities around the world that said, "Patents kill." And it was a picture of a cadaver. And, and it was, vaccinate the world. It was in support of the waiver. And so, we're coming out of the pandemic, and the WTO is considering extending the waiver. Patrick and I testified at the ITC hearings, and we continue to hear other over-the-top rhetoric. Like, I'm sure you'd be all delighted to know that biopharma industry lies about how much money it actually costs to invent a new drug. It's only $16 million, as some people claimed who were testifying to the ITC, per drug, which is we would have cures for every single drug disease in the world today if that's how I would sell my house and everything to invest in creating a new drug if that's all it cost. So can you comment on how the patent system in particular, but just how the U.S. Innovation system made possible kind of the unprecedented response to the pandemic? Did patents actually hinder in any way, shape, or form, or did they actually promote and assist actually the creation and commercial distribution of these life-saving vaccines and drugs and diagnostics?
I mentioned how important the market functions of intellectual property are. So we're in a huge economy with fungible capital that through our public and private equity markets can flow in many different directions. How do we get capital allocated to those sort of cutting edge, high risk, long-term capital intensive investments that are necessary to produce results like an mRNA platform, like quantum computing, like all the things that we need to sort of lead the world in technological development? Well, it's creating that ownership that allows people to collaborate together. Without ownership, everything breaks down. If I'm here, at the Center for Innovation Research, and I need to buy, 1,000 bottles of water for a conference, I go to someone who owns those bottles of water. If I, pay them and then I find out, well, they didn't actually own it, where are we? We can't do business together. The whole thing breaks down. Ownership matters. I think, Kara's, all this, the young people, they get that. They understand that ownership matters. We don't have to get, carried away with discussions of profits and monopoly profits. I think we do ourselves a disservice sometimes when we talk about IP in terms of incentive and reward. No, innovation is its own incentive. And why do we innovate? We innovate to do something new and better. Having a sustainable business is a necessary part of that.
So patents do at least two things. Patents incentivize innovation and investment in that innovation. And number two, patents work to bring that innovation to the public, to provide access to that innovation to the public, to commercialize it. We do ourselves a disfavor when sometimes we speak in terms of a quid pro quo, as if one is sacrificed for the other. And some folks in the public arena have created a dichotomy between protecting the innovation and the inventor and incentivizing that innovation on the one hand, and then public access to that innovation on the other hand. That if you protect the inventor and that investment with strong IP, you're preventing access to that innovation. That's a false dichotomy. And we should never speak in these terms, in my opinion. The fact of the matter is that patents facilitate both. Obviously, everybody understands that patents incentivize the inventor and folks investing in that innovation. But patents, what most people don't understand is that patents also incentivize the commercialization of that invention, bringing it to market. Patents and other IP are the currency of innovation. It allows trade in that innovation. It allows the exchange of ideas. It allows for collaboration. the pharma industry needs to make sure that the public understands that the collaboration during the pandemic with respect to the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics, collaboration was at an all-time high. Hundreds upon hundreds of collaboration agreements between small companies and big companies like BioNTech and Pfizer. Big companies and big companies such as AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute of India, or Johnson & Johnson and Merck. Does anybody think, and there's hundreds of these, does anybody think that these companies would have been willing voluntarily in a free market economy without governments forcing them? Would they be willing to collaborate with some of their biggest competitors and provide the secret sauce if they could not rely on the rule of law and the protection provided by IP? IP enables collaboration and the distribution of the innovation to the public. And there is no question, in my mind, that IP facilitated not just the invention of the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, but also the access of the public, the unbelievable speed with which they were made available to the public. And you know, we just have to make sure that we don't create this false dichotomy. It's not one or the other. It really is both.
Yeah, and I think I just want to double down on that, right? I mean, Moderna, everyone thinks, right, that mRNA happened in 12 months and then the vaccine happened. I work in Kendall Square. Moderna has been located in Kendall Square since 2010, since I was there, and they've been struggling to get their mRNA to a point of, you know, bringing it to the market, to people. And obviously, because of what happened with COVID, we had concentrated effort, time, human capital, financial resources put into this to accelerate that timeline. But had that not happened, there probably wouldn't be a vaccine with mRNA that we'd be using right now, right? Not yet, maybe. And so I think that's what's critically important. I think the other thing that's really interesting is, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier as it relates to Bidol. And so I think it was March 23rd, that date might be wrong, so don't fight me if it is. But, you know, Moderna had to go to a hearing with the Health Committee, Bernie Sanders, because we want price controls now on the vaccine in the commercial market. So in theory, that vaccine probably saved about $5 trillion of healthcare costs, millions and millions, billions, who knows, of lives. And now we don't want them to reap the benefit of any, you know, financial upside, right? But yet for a decade, they'd put so much private investment into the research of mRNA to get it where it is, and now we want to slap them on the wrist for that? I mean, this is really how we can create an environment of stifling future innovation.
Can I address the waiver for a minute, because it relates to this issue? So there's a lot of pressure on world governments, including the US government, to waive IP for emergencies like COVID-19. There was this huge fight at the WTO, and the US agreed, and the WTO did agreed to allow countries to waive patent rights when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines. By the way, after that whole huge fight, not a single country has exercised that right yet. That tells you that patents are not really stifling anything here. But now there was a request to extend that waiver to therapeutics and diagnostics when it comes to COVID-19. And there was a deadline that countries should agree to this at the WTO by December of 2022 of last year, or thereabouts, okay? Now, the WTO works by consensus. Basically, every country has to agree to make a change, and the only way this would have passed is if everybody, including the United States, agreed to that extended waiver, okay? There were several countries that clearly disagreed, including, by the way, Mexico and some others. And it would have failed What happened, though, in December of 2022, the Biden administration said, well, let's study it further. Most of the patent world celebrated that, saying, thank God they didn't agree to waive patents for therapeutics and diagnostics. I said in December, and I'll say it again now, it was a huge mistake for the Biden administration to say, let's study it further, because it provided additional life to this idea that we're going to extend the waiver to therapeutics and diagnostics. If the United States would have been at least silent, the whole thing would have died back in December because there was no consensus. Other countries publicly opposed it. We didn't have to be public about it. We should have been publicly opposing it. But if they didn't want to do that, they could have just been silent. It would have died. The waiver would have died and we would have moved on. Now, there are these hearings at the ITC. I think Adam and Patrick testified last week. The Council for Innovation Promotion also testified through Frank Cullen. But anyway, so now there are these hearings, and who knows what's going to happen. But here's the sad part. We're still in the middle of, the pandemic. Doesn't matter what declarations are made. People still get COVID. People still die from COVID. It sure would be nice to have more therapeutics to treat COVID. But think about it. What CEO in their right mind is going to, right now knowing that their patents are, could very well be waived, what CEO in their right mind is going to make the decision to invest $2.6 billion on average to bring a new therapeutic to market, most of which will fail anyway, and knowing that if it succeeds, its IP is likely to be taken away. It's not a question of what might happen, not a question of how are we going to innovate therapeutics for future undeveloped pandemics yet. It's a question of developing therapeutics that are going to save people's lives today for this pandemic. I really hope this ITC investigation ends quickly and concludes that there is no need to extend it, because this uncertainty is harming the market and investment in these critical technologies.
Yeah, if anyone is interested in kind of, I think, an incredible book that describes the heroic efforts over decades to create the mRNA platform, and the key role actually that comes out of this about the uncertainty in science and the uncertainty in the licensing and how patent served as a driver of a lot of this, is A Shot to Save the World by Gregory Zuckerman, which recounts kind of it's about the creation of the whole mRNA platform, which occurred over decades, which a lot of people don't realize when they say, oh, this is a new treatment. No, this has been something that has been in development for many decades. In fact, it wasn't 12 months to create it. It was 12 months to test it. Moderna famously invented their vaccine in 2 days, which had never been done in history. For those who know, the previous record for the speed of a development of a vaccine, I think, was 3 years or 5 years, 3 or 5 years. But we went from 3 or 5 years to 2 days with the creation of this new technology. And the reward for this is price controls, waiver of your IP rights. So the signal that's being sent to innovators is, yes, work very hard, expend thousands and thousands of labor hours, and your reward is we take away your rights, we attack you in the public policy debates, and we make it harder for you to do the continued work that you're doing. So China, which sat out of the vaccine debate at the WTO, has actually announced that it will support a waiver of therapeutics and diagnostics. And China is a global competitor, and of course, is engaging in a integrated two-prong policy of stealing intellectual property from other countries and creating an internal system to develop and promote strong intellectual property for its own innovators. And so what is the best response to this? I mean, this is kind of the topic du jour right now in Washington, D.C. There have been a couple of hearings on this recently on the Hill. What do we do in response to China? Some people, think that maybe we should embrace the type of industrial policies that China has been engaging in the past 10 or 15 years, as represented by the CHIPS Act, where the government invests and extends subsidies to companies and other areas of the economy. Others think that we should strengthen our intellectual property system. Are these actually mutually exclusive of each other, or is this something that we should engage in a coordinated way? I wanted to kind of throw that out to the panel in our last few minutes, and then maybe we can get some questions from the audience.
I would suggest that the most fundamental difference between the United States and China is one of rule of law versus rule by law, which in other words is authoritarianism. And in a rule of law, democratic and market environment, you can and should be able to empower individuals. And in an authoritarian rule by law environment, the political elite is dictating to those individuals what they should do and what direction they should take their activity in. And so it's worrisome to me when I see industrial policy discussed at high levels in Washington in a way that seeks to maybe catch up with what China is doing, and this perception that maybe they've done it well in certain respects. You heard the president's national security advisor just earlier this week give a long speech rejecting globalization. So Thomas Friedman, wherever he is, might be having a stiff drink. That will never work for the United States. China is more than 4 times larger than we are. They're good at the authoritarian thing. We are not. Our competitive advantage is in empowering individuals in the intellectual property and innovation, creative space. That means for us putting more rungs on the ladder, especially at the bottom of the ladder. We talked today about the complexity and difficulty of the IP system. The rungs on the ladder are too high. Most people can't reach them. We need to build more accessibility into this system, and that's how we beat China. Not that we need to beat them, that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Well, I think we need to beat them. It's better than the alternative.
Yes.
So I agree with Patrick. I don't think industrial policy works in the United States. What's worked really well for the United States is the free market, all since our founding, and empowering entrepreneurs and innovators and startups and folks struggling to better themselves and their families and their communities, and inventing the next best thing. Having said that, I do believe that the United States, as I said in my opening comments, needs some form of an innovation policy. And to me, those things are very, very different. We have a foreign policy. Every president, every presidential candidate has on their website their foreign policy, for example, and for their major, hotspots in the world. They have a jobs policy. There needs to be, and now we're going to have a presidential race in 2024. I would urge all the candidates to give thought to what is their innovation platform, and to think about it holistically. There are lots and lots of different prongs that go into American innovation. IP is first and foremost. It cannot happen without IP. Innovation cannot happen at scale in a free market economy without the protection of the rule of law, without property rights. What is your vision as a presidential candidate? What is your vision on intellectual property rights? And then, I don't expect any of them to get into PTAB policy or into Section 101 in their presidential platforms, but just have a general thought about what's your vision for protecting American intellectual property domestically and internationally. What is your vision for protecting data and data management in the United States? Think about investment in research and development. How is the government to interact with universities and with industry? Just give thought to all of these things. We need folks to think about these issues holistically. Otherwise, it's in bits and pieces, it's completely disorganized, and most of the time, when you look at one issue on its own, in isolation, you come up with a wrong result. The Innovation Reduction Act is a very good example of that. The TRIPS waiver is another example of that. I don't think people are badly intentioned. I think the administration and other governments around the world wanted to do the right thing, which is provide more vaccines to more people in developing and developed countries around the world. That's noble. That's the right thing to do. That's the right goal to have. But if you don't have innovation policy at the top of your mind, you don't even think about the consequences that some of these things will have on the next inventor, the next startup, and the overall national innovation economy. So while I very much agree that we have to stay away from the top-down type of industrial policy, and I'm very much against the subsidies, and that does absolutely nothing in the long run. And in fact, it's harmful to the little guy, and it's very disruptive. I am very much in favor of people at high levels beginning to think holistically about innovation policy in the United States.
Well, and the devil's in the details, right? But there is a difference between industrial policy and industrial strategy. And I think what you're getting at is the latter.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, we are an innovation economy, and when you think about it, again, from a Massachusetts lens, I mean, it's our economic engine here. We employ over 130,000 individuals in life sciences broadly. That includes med device, right? $21 billion in wages paid. Why would we want to stifle that economy here? 57% of new drugs are developed here in the United States. Why would we want to create additional hurdles and barriers? And when you think about the financial impact, but think about patients, right? So it's just so counterintuitive that we continue, our partners in government don't work with us to continue to foster an innovation economy, but they create additional hurdles and barriers to make it harder and harder to innovate here. And we talked about it earlier, but companies will still innovate, right? Science will still happen, but will it happen in the United States? Now, fundamentally, we shouldn't care where it happens because we want to help patients. But why would we hurt something that is helping patients, helping our economy, providing jobs? Why wouldn't we continue to foster that? And that's both nationally and here in Massachusetts, right? I mean, there's a lot of times that we are up against the wall with our partners in government trying to say, but this is the economic engine for your economy. Why are we getting in these type of debates?
Adam, it's time for a couple of questions.
Right, that's us. I was going to now, here's your chance to ask a question of a powerhouse panel. Dan, yeah.
So since we do have such a great panel, why do you think the efforts to control drug pricing and everything has fallen in the patent area and not the antitrust area? I mean, why the focus? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but I believe it's a very good question. In fact, it's counterintuitive. Because I believe patents are the best natural tool against monopolies and the most pro-competitive natural tools to have. It's easier to enable a strong patent system, enable inventors to disrupt the status quo and the established firms. It's better to do that than to, from top down, try to break them up in unnatural ways. Dan, to your question, I think the answer is that people don't understand the law. It's an easy target. You know, look at the billboard that they were running around town in D.C. last summer. Patents kill. Adam's example.
And why is the conversation only about drug pricing? Let's look holistically at the healthcare system. We're just starting to talk about PBMs, but come on, right? But that we're easy target, right? And there's a deep misunderstanding because it's complex the way the system works, and unless you're doing it on a daily basis, and particularly if you're in government, this is a complex area and you really have to sit with it for a while. But pointing at a pharmaceutical company that you saw that made billions of dollars from one drug is an easy target without understanding holistically how the healthcare system's working.
There are also strange bedfellows that have been created here. So big established technology companies, for example, that benefit from a weaker patent system for their own reasons are finding common ground with patient rights group that are pushing for lower drug pricing and therefore weaker patents in the drug space. And it doesn't matter where the weakness comes from because it's one patent system. So you have a lot of lobbying effort from multiple different technology sectors that go towards weakening the patent system, and it's been going on for 2 decades probably. And that has an effect.
Hi, Steve Brockman, freelance IP journalist. I had a question kind of going back to the China discussion. I know we focused on that a little bit, and actually, so Adam, I watched Innovation Race, and it was a really good movie. And I talked to Luke, who directed it, and he did some really good work. And my point to him, I thought a little bit was, we talk, I know, you know, and most of us in this room have a good grasp on the national security implications of the innovation race. You know, America wants to be leading in 5G, 6G, things with wider applications than just telecommunications. But when we talk about national security, I go home to Buffalo, New York, beautiful, tropical, balmy Buffalo, New York, and I talk to 99% of the people in that town that I speak to about this glaze over like a Krispy Kreme in 5 seconds when I bring up patent law, right? Because it's difficult to get these abstract concepts across. So I'm wondering, what do you think the elevator pitch should be if national security, because to my thinking, so the movie talked a lot about a Sputnik moment, and my point to Luke was, I don't know that we're there right now in the same way, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but back in the 60s, we didn't have a lot of consumer interaction at all, and you can get cheap goods through apps like Temu, or T-E-M-U, and there's just more avenues to actually be an American consumer going, well, I don't know that I care about the national security implications, so what do you think, if you have 15 to 30 seconds to try to grab someone's attention, what do you think should that conversation be about?
First, let me just say, the Sputnik moment didn't just happen. It took a visionary leader like President Kennedy to focus the nation on it, okay? Most people back then wouldn't have worried too much about, oh, there's a satellite up there. They wouldn't even have known, especially back then, before the internet era. It took visionary leadership from the very top of government to get this issue done. We don't have that. We haven't had that in a while on these particular issues. But to answer your question, let me put the fear of God in you or the audience here. Imagine a robotic soldier, okay, that has artificial intelligence and learns on its own as it walks or drives through the field in an autonomous fashion. It is computing with chips in its body. It's computing at quantum speeds, which are millions upon millions of times faster than any supercomputer in use today. And it's communicating with other robotic soldiers of its ilk at 6G, 7G, and beyond speeds. Imagine the convergence of those three technologies, AI, quantum, and communications at the highest levels. And the country that puts that first robotic soldier together will immediately and instantaneously obliterate anyone else that it wants to. And you don't even have to think only about robotic soldiers on a field in battle. Think about cybersecurity and cryptocurrencies and your bank codes. The country that has quantum computing with artificial intelligence combined and telecom can instantaneously undo any protections we all have on our banking system and modes of communications between within our infrastructure, our lighting system, our street lights, and they can control it from very far and instantaneously and automatically. So the convergence of these industries, of these technologies, in my view, it's a matter of urgent national security that it has to happen here. I do believe that we need to win this race. And the only way to win this race is if we enable our inventors to invest faster and better immediately in these various areas of technology. That was more than 30 seconds, but, you know, scary enough, I think.
Well, I thought we had 5 more minutes, but Bruce is yanking us off the stage. So I want to thank all of our panelists for fantastic insights and commentary, and I look forward to seeing the tweet on social media about how Andrei Iancu thinks that the president should have a position on written description and whether genus claims should be valid or not. But thank you to Kendalle and to Patrick and to Andrei for really important insights about our innovation economy, the importance of intellectual property, and the global competitive threat that we face from China.
One super quick thing. Last week was World IP Day, celebrating women in IP, accelerating innovation, creativity. I think it's really cool to look around the room. I know Bruce had a lot to do with it, to see so many women leaders here. Thanks.
Thank you all.